So I'm again here to introduce the next speaker, who is Martin Kaeser from eXXcellent Solutions. Martin's presentation topic is computed properties for UI5, the concept known from other frameworks, now thanks to Martin's work available also for UI5. So Martin, please, the stream is yours.
Thank you, Greg, and hello. I'm Martin Kaeser, living and working in Ulm, Germany. A little bit about my professional background. As a software developer and architect, I work with different JavaScript UI frameworks like Angular, Vue.js, and lastly UI5. I'm interested in tools and techniques that help developers to write clean and understandable code. And this is where computed properties come in. So what are computed properties? It can be used to store intermediate results. So it's something like a temporary variable. You can have a calculation function that takes some input parameters and calculates something and stores it in a computed property. That's the idea. And whenever one of the input changes, the computed property should be updated as well. It should behave like any normal model property. So any normal UI5 model property, it should behave like that. It is stored as a property. And it is a concept that is used in Vue.js and Aurelia. And I have developed a simple library for UI5 that you can try out and use to have computed properties in UI5. So let's start with an example. It's a very simple text editor. So you can switch on edit mode, and then you can edit these text fields. And when you change something, some of the controls should disappear and other controls should appear when it changes the state that the user has changed something. To show you, I'll just share my screen and I'll show you the demo application. This is the simple editor. You can switch on edit, then you note the buttons. This one button disappears and a cancel button appears. And then when I start editing, this button in turn disappears and some other controls appear. You can reset and it goes back to normal. This is a pretty simple idea, I think, a pretty simple application. And but now the question is, how can you implement it best? You can do it the UI5 way, with the standard UI5 way. You can use expression bindings normally, or you can use a formatter. With an expression binding, you would write the condition in every place where you need it. So you compare the actual data against the backup copy of the data, and then you see the data has changed, and you show some buttons or you hide some buttons. With a formatter, it's a little more, you can have a little better reusability, because you can have a function in the controller that you can reuse, but you still can't, you still have to write down all the bindings, all the parameters for the function in every place where you need it. So the syntax is a little bit verbose. It's not very reusable, and you have to write the logic in the Vue. That's not ideal. To get a clearer impression, I'll show you show you the code, how it is implemented with standard UI5 way, in the standard UI5 way. So I'll show you the screen, and where you see a couple of buttons. There's a save button, reset button, cancel button, and you see in the comment it says this button should be shown if it's in edit mode and if we are in change state. So yeah, we have this condition for edit mode, and we have a condition that checks if it's changed. For reset, it's exactly the same. For cancel, it's nearly the same. It's edit mode and inverted. Check here. So you can imagine it's a lot of duplicating code. So what else can you do? This is where the library comes in, and it provides a custom element for that. it's a custom element that's called computed property. It uses two attributes that you can set. One attribute is var, that accepts a binding to the computed property that you want your value assigned to, and you have a value attribute that takes the expression that you want evaluated. So this computed property element is really, really simple. It just takes advantage of expression binding, and it really just propagates any change to value onto var. I like to, and when you want to use it, you can just use it like any other property. So I like to show you in the code how this version looks. So in this alternative version, you have in the view, here we have our computed property. It defines a change computed property in the local model. The label is just for debugging purposes, and the condition for changed is here is mentioned here as an expression binding. And then further on, the expressions for the visibility of the buttons get pretty simple. You can use them directly. You can invert them. You can use an expression binding. You can do anything. And I like to show you how a computed property is implemented, because it's really, really simple. It's just a custom element that defines the variable, the var, and the value properties. And whenever the value changes, it propagates the value, if it really has changed, onto the property var. That's really the basic idea. This is pretty nice, I think. So you have better reusability, but there's more. You don't have to write down the computed property in the view. You can define it in the controller. So for this, you have the alternative way to use a computed property builder, which you define in the controller. You set the var you want to be assigned to, and you give in. You don't have to write the expression binding explicitly. You can, but you don't have to. You can put in a JavaScript function, could be an arrow function, could be a named or anonymous function, whatever. But it should be a pure function that only uses its inputs, no side effects. And you put in bindings to the parameters, which are also again variable bindings, which are also model bindings. And when you add the builder to a view, because keep in mind the builder is just something on top of a computed property. It depends on the computed property element and just adds it to a view. And before it does that, it stores the function that you give to it in an internal model, and it creates an expression binding from it that refers to the function in the model here, and then applies the parameters to it, and then it dynamically adds it to the view. So I like to show you in the code now. So in this version, it's similar. The view doesn't really change, but you don't have to define the computed property there. But there's the corresponding controller. In the onInit function, you define your computed property, and here I have shown as an example that you can reuse a computed property to calculate other computed properties. So we define a helper function that just concatenates all the input values. It's just a simple hash function, and it calculates a current hash from the current data and a backup hash from the backup data. And then we define a changed property, a changed computed property that refers to both hashes and compares them. And they are both added to the root of a view. For this to work, the computed property builder gets a reference to the controller. So with this reference. I like to show you in the demo application that it really works. So this is the version with the builder. So you can switch on edit, you can edit, and yeah, the buttons just behaves the same way as it should. And there's another nice benefit, I think. When you switch on debug mode, you get some debug info whenever a computer property changes. It is logged out on debug level, and you can filter with computer property for the text computer property, and you get your changes. So I change it here, and you see this hash here changes. So I change it again, it changes here, and you see the local changed computer property is only updated once. Here it has changed. Afterwards, it stays the same, and it's not changing again. If you turn it back, you see the current hash switches back, and the changed property changes back to false. What are the benefits? You have reusability again, and in my opinion, it's more readable, and the logic can now be located in the controller where it belongs in my opinion. So this is pretty much the basic principle how the library works. But I like to show you another more advanced use case just to get an idea what you can do with computer properties. So consider this. We have a table here that just shows some list data. This data is from a model that contains an array of elements, and each element consists of a first name, family name, and email. But yeah, when we define two computer properties on it, a row counter that just calculates the length of the array, and a pretty email that concatenates first name, family name, and email. But for this to work, we don't really want to pollute our original model. We want to create an intermediate model, a temporary model that contains the original data, but also contains additional data like a pretty email. So I'd like to show you the demo to get an impression how it works. Here, here's the editor. We can now add additional elements, and the row counter updates. We can change here the email, and when we save, it writes back to the original model, and the pretty email gets updated as well. Let's take a look in debug mode, and we see when we add a new element, the count is updated, of course, but also the wrap data is updated. I'll show you in a moment how the wrap data is constructed. So this is the temporary data that is created from the original list. So, and when we added something, let's just clear it. Only this one email is updated, not everything. So this should be efficient. Yeah, we need to create a computed property that creates the wrapped list from the original list. So this does a transformation from the array with the data to another list that has for each element reference to the original object. It's just a reference. It doesn't copy anything. So when you update this, when you change this, it reflects back to the original list. And additionally, a temp property that can be used for either your own fields that you want to store, like edit modes is switched on or off for this one, or it can contain the pretty email that is just temporary data for every row that you need. But for this to work, you have to consider that the list has to be updated to be reflected. So you can't just do in place changes. You have to, so if you add a new element, you have to use array concat, create a new array with a shallow copy of the elements. You can't just use push. Yeah. And then another thing to think about is we need the pretty email to be calculated for every row. So we can't use an absolute binding. We have to use a relative binding, relative to each row. So we can do this with a builder or with a computer property itself. We just for the var and for the parameters, we just use relative binding. And additionally, it's important to add the computer property not to the root of a view, but to the row template. And this causes the computer property to be duplicated into every row, and then it works. So some short words about the library. The library is available on GitHub. You can, it uses ECMAScript 5 for compatibility reasons. And as I have mentioned before, it logs any changes that occur to the computer properties on debug level. And to be not overwhelmed by all the debug info, you should filter for computer property. For this library, to try out or to use in your project, you can just copy the computer property and computer property builder from the lib folder. Yeah, to summarize, the computer properties offer you two different ways how to use them. You can use a computer property in the view directly, or you can use on top the computer property builder, and then you have a benefit that you can write the property in the controller, and it gets more clean and readable, I think. Computer properties can help you to avoid redundancy. It provides, I think, a reasonable abstraction, because it's just like a temporary variable, in my opinion, which most languages, of course, have. It improves the readability, and you can, if you use it in the controller, you can keep the logic in the controller and don't have to write your business logic in the view.
First one, it's a comment, but I can turn it into the question as well. Now, wouldn't that be cool if computed property would be available as a custom UI5 community control? So at GitHub UI5 community.
Yeah, currently it's not, but I'm thinking about it. Currently, you have to just copy these controls. It's just pretty new, but when it gets more used, and yeah, we think about to use it to publish this as a community component, right?
Okay, good, thanks. Next one is, what's the advantage of using this way comparing to using a global model or a Boolean state and an event being triggered on this control? Use a function that accesses it, and that function can be on base controller that each controller extended.
I'm not really sure how the idea is. Yeah. You can use a function, of course, when it's, you have to use a formatter. It's the idea with a formatter, but the advantage against a formatter is that you can, on a formatter, you have to mention each parameter that you want to use. So, yeah, it's not that modular. You can't abstract it that well.
Is there any references in GitHub for demo app for computed properties for UI5?
Yeah, right. In the GitHub, there's both. It contains in one folder the lib and in one folder the demo app. Just the demo app that I showed you. You can check it out in your own time. You check through it. yeah, if you want, I can just switch over to GitHub if there's time, and I can show you how it's organized. So this is the GitHub. There's some information how you can run it. It's information how the demo can be run. So, and then there's also the presentation here in one folder, and in the source folder, you have the web app, and it's for now organized in one folder lib, which just contains the computer property and the builder, and another folder that contains the rest of the demo application. So you can should easily find your way, I hope. So, and the example application is here. Simple is our first examples with the editor, and table is the application with that does the more advanced editor.
So that was the last question. Maybe one from my side. Have you investigated whether SAP is planning to put it in, or have you discussed raising it as a feature to include in the future versions?
In what version you're
in the next UI5 versions?
Yeah, that's a good idea. I was thinking about it because an earlier version of this computer property I showed in some community talk, and where it was mentioned again. So probably I think about to put it as a merge request into UI5.
So thank you very much, Martin.
Thank you, Greg. Bye.